Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Here we are, and my job is to introduce this event, this cross-border creative conversation. And my name is, as you can see, Jadranka Anđelić. I am a theater director from Serbia, co-founder of DAH Theater, and lately, last years, living and working from between Brazil and Serbia. Today, I will moderate this meeting. And this is the Arts and Human Rights Festival Across the Borders online event hosted by Smashing Times International Center for the Arts and Equality and DAH Theater from Serbia. And it's a part of the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival 2020 and our Serbian Festival for Arts and Human Rights in Belgrade. So my pleasure is to introduce our speakers, and this is in order that is going to present their work. Dijana Milošević, theater director, co-founder, and artistic director of DAH Theater. John Scott, dancer, choreographer, and founder of Irish Modern Dance Theater. Ray Yates, Dublin City Arts Officer. Welcome, everyone. Jenny MacDonald, creator and director of Solo Sirens Festival. Nice to have you all here. And Mary Minihan, writer, director, theater and filmmaker, artistic director of Smashing Times International Center for Arts and Equality. Well, so I will invite now Dijana to begin and to give her small speech, talk, and we will keep on going. And of course, after all of you present your work, we will have some time for conversation, questions between us and between audience, and I will help you. Okay, Dijana?
Yes, hello all. It is my pleasure to take part in this creative conversation across the borders. It was a great pleasure really to collaborate with Smashing Times. We are already collaborating on several European projects. And as DAH Theater is a company that exists for 29 years, we have organized many events, many festivals until now. But the last years, we were really thinking about organizing a festival that relates to human rights. And then when we met Smashing Times, and last year we saw the edition of Festival Arts and Human Rights in Dublin, and we were really inspired. Actually, it was like this last push for us, like, let's do the festival in Serbia. Because of pandemic, our festivals are happening at the same time, which is actually amazing. This was not initial plan. Initial plan was that we would have the festival in July. But in a way, now I'm thinking maybe this is very cool. We should really do that in a way in the future, hoping that we shall have also live events. So we are going to have to jump to each other's festivals. But what is really important is to say that obviously there is the need for this kind of the festival in our very different countries, in our very different contexts. And for us, this is the first festival, Arts and Human Rights. We are very proud. We just opened it yesterday, and we are having a mix of live events and online events because still the situation with virus is not so bad in our country. And we thought that it was very important to meet live as long as we can, because for me it is like living in some science fiction dream that we can't meet anymore physically. Although this is also very nice, this opportunity that we can meet across the borders like this. Our festival was initiated with the idea, first of all, to explore and give our citizens idea of what is the culture of human rights, because it's not only that human rights are violated in our country and also broader, but in our country specifically, there is not the real culture of human rights, meaning people are not aware what are their rights. They're not aware of different aspects of the rights, how to practice them, how to ask for them, and so on. And generally, the situation, the country asks for really engagement of our citizens, because people are living for a long time in a very challenging situation, politically speaking, economically speaking, and on the top is pandemic, and people started to feel very isolated, very lethargic, and without the hope that it is possible, that the change is possible. We at Dark Theatre, and I believe we share this with our friends from Smashing Times, deeply believe that the change of our communities and societies is possible, and that each of us could and should take an action. And this was our goal, to motivate people, to give them different example of artistic practices, of the activist practices that use arts and so on, to engage, to ask for their rights, to really go with the burning questions and needs they have, and to connect. This festival here in Belgrade is also, in a way, practicing of the solidarity. It is very important that we stay together, and also that we connect between ourselves, and also to connect across the borders. This year, we are presenting a lot the work of the local artists and activists, the work that is coming from the field of theater, with shows that are speaking about the children's rights. This is the show of Dark Theatre, about the violence in society in general. This is the show of the theater that deals with the prisoners. The show from Brazil we even have, that is speaking about the trafficking of women. The show also from Belgrade, that was directed by our moderator, last night opened the festival, that used the analogy of like replanting the plants, as transplanting the plants, as basically people get transplanted to other countries, to other cultures. Obviously, the situation with migrants, what does it mean? What kind of the care people and plants really need to be able to grow in other surroundings? We are having lots of installations. We are having even one interactive choreography in the van, speaking about the also the closeness and the distance. We are having distillation in the toilet of one venue, because also an artist, Zoya Gudovic, is exploring the intimacy and what does it mean to share the space. There are also student choreographies from the Institute of Modern Dance that are dealing with the topic of isolation transformation. There are lots of debates, conference about the gender equality and arts in challenging contexts. There are video works, and so on and so on. So it's really exciting space that we are trying to create, exciting platform, and we do hope that we shall motivate and really engage the people from our community. The festival lasts until Wednesday, and so please, we are inviting everyone to follow it, or live if possible, if they're here in Serbia, in Belgrade, or through also online possibilities and online programs. It's the work, and it's really the work with full heart of the whole team of Dark Theatre that worked around the clocks for many months. And we do hope to have this festival annually as Smashing Times, and really to promote the power of arts that could maybe have this specific, unique power to heal, to connect, to create dialogues, to transform the society, maybe in a way that not other fields have, although we also need to connect with other fields. So with this, I will finish this presentation of the festival, and then we can talk after.
Thank you, Diana. So let's continue. Let's hear John, please, and then we will all engage.
Thank you so much. So I'm John Scott, and I am an Irish 60-year-old dancer, choreographer, and opera singer. I began my dance journey late at the age of 22. And initially, my inspiration came from theater. I came from a family of, my brother Michael is a theater director. My father, Leslie, was a lighting designer in the National Theatre. So I was kind of doomed to work in performing arts. But I came to dance late, and my initial inspiration was the Living Theatre, an American poetic political experimental theatre run by Judith Malina and Julian Beck. And then also the composer-choreographer Meredith Monk and the Judson Dance Theatre. I'd encountered the Living Theatre when they came to Dublin Theatre Festival when I was in my late teens. And their work electrified me more than the theatre that I had seen in my normal life. And then dance further inspired me as I started to travel and learn. And I choose to express all of my identity using the word dance, which you could call the poetry of the body, because dance for me is the most vital art form, the most electrifying. It's beyond language. Dance has the power to bring joy and excitement to every part of a community, and it transcends ethnicity, age, body type when it's let. For me, dance flourishes without implied meanings, without narrative, without the necessity of a story. My own work is theatrical, multidisciplinary, engaging works that allow audiences to create their own narrative, ranging from virtuosic to ecstatic to comic to deeply personal. My practice is greatly enhanced and informed by my commitment to working equally with all genre of professional dancers. And also, since 2003, I have been lucky enough to work with survivors of torture from a refugee NGO called the Centre for Care of Survivors of Torture in Dublin. And they have become, with all of my other dancers, collaborators. And we make works that express what's inside when words maybe aren't enough. And since my getting to know people turned migrants, I think in the political and strategic work of my company and festival, I try to tackle racism in the context of what is permitted and accepted as Irish identity and as dance. It's even more acute when we're on international platforms, when we travel. One of the people I met in the Centre for Care of Survivors of Torture, who was not a trained dancer. She was from a Central African country, and she asked to work in dance because she said drama would involve talking about the trauma. But in contrast, dance would make you do things that really don't remind you of other things because your body is the one talking, not you. And one of the group described the workshops that I initially gave as giving them permission to express themselves without having to talk about the bad things. You can speak with your body in an involuntary way, things that you're not ready to speak about yourself. And I made a piece called Fall and Recover with a cast, principally of people who were clients of the Centre for Care for Survivors of Torture. We made it in Dublin at a time when there had been a referendum, a very polarizing referendum on the citizenship rights of people born in Ireland. And the country shamefully, at the time I was in a studio working with asylum seekers and people who were trying to put their lives back together and to find a place in Ireland in society. There was this xenophobic propaganda coming from political parties to vote to remove the citizenship right from people born in the country. And performing Fall and Recover in that context became a political act of defiance. Refugees, asylum seekers, a country is meant to protect people Human rights are meant to be universal, but really they're only guaranteed by governments of their citizens, of the people who have papers. Asylum seekers are in an in-between state. They're stateless, they're unprotected. In a sense, they don't have any identity. And to put people without protection, without papers, on a stage, to get people to look at them, to invite people to look at them, was more political than any of us could have dreamed of, because they're not part of our society. They're without passports or state protection. So performing, speaking, dancing, it forced the audience to confront and acknowledge a part of society that they didn't normally see. And my dance lives in the present moment, and it speaks about it doesn't speak consciously, but we absorb the social changes taking place. And my work tries to be inclusive. In 2019, I founded a festival in Dublin and New York called the Dancer from the Dance Festival of Irish Choreography. It was a response to a curiosity when I traveled internationally about what is happening in Ireland. What is Irish dance? Is there Irish dance outside of river dance? All of these type of questions. And I put together a festival. Initially, we had, I think, 13 choreographers in the first edition. And this year, we had to become virtual, and we had 32 choreographers. I described it as a gathering of Irish and Irish identifying choreographers from Ireland, the USA, and elsewhere. Morgan Bullock, the African-American dancer with no Irish blood, but she expresses herself through Irish step dancing. Jean Butler was part of it. Two Irish Nigerians, Mufutau Youssef, Toby Omotesu, who identify as Irish. And we had a panel discussion on how the body carries stories. In a way, it was about addressing without directly saying things about racism. It was addressing the perceived right of people to call themselves Irish, of different people, if they were not red hair, freckles, or if their skin color was different, or their cultural expression was outside of the permitted, accepted Irish work. What does an Irish person choreograph about, or make art about? So, I mean, my company rehearses. We're like all other companies. We perform, we tour, we make funding applications, we meet presenters, we contact journalists. It's the typical life of a nonprofit arts organization. But since I started working with asylum seekers, I have also had to go to courthouses and call lawyers, and sometimes even write affidavits to appeal deportation orders. Sometimes I have had to go to the Garda National Immigration Bureau. It is where the deportations emanate from. And I've had to wait with one of my dancers who has a deportation order. And possibly the deportation order will be stamped and they're told to come back in 2 weeks. And I watch because sometimes they are known to take them inside and upstairs and away in a plane. Dances may be considered to be an elite art form, and I never thought when I started my company or when I started pursuing these things and attending performances in bohemian spaces in Berlin, in New York, that my dance would become important for the human rights and the survival of some of the people I worked with. One of the dancers said that when we dance, she said, I could say I'm in heaven because I'm mingling with so many people others can't see. She performed this arm gesture, and she said she's in heaven with her dead ancestors. And she said in the dance, her life is how it was before everything went wrong. And I think one other choreographer came to see the work in New York. We performed, and we had all the trouble of getting visas for people with UN refugee travel documents that are not real passports, trying to get a transit visa to cross the UK, to take a plane to Brazil, trying to go to different places, going to Palestinian dance festivals. The whole thing became so loaded, making an abstract postmodern dance, but making it with the people I make it with, and also for the people we choose to perform it, became more political. When I first met the Living Theatre, they were performing a work called Prometheus, which finished with a protest outside a prison. And I thought, whoa, this is edgy. This is pushing me to an edge. I don't know how political I am. And I suddenly found myself sitting in courthouses and going to embassies and fishing out papers with lawyers in offices, in the same place that I had found myself when I marched with the Living Theatre after their performance. I have fallen into this politics, but I pursue the right of all of the people I work with and the people I represent to work and to show their work. Traveling and bringing the work and representing Ireland with people who are not just the red-haired, pale-skinned Irish people who are doing stories about the Irish potato famine or our troubled political past. It didn't seem to me to be a radical thing to do, but it seems, because some of the people I work with are attacked and criticized for not having the right to express themselves as Irish. It's becoming more and more of a battle, and the more we fight and the more visibility and the more acclaim we have had, I think we're winning. We're making some strides. We're establishing our identity, but then I see even more opposition. So it is a fight we have to continue and to fight more and to make awareness. And I am happy and I rejoice that the work that we do and the work of all the other people who are participating in this festival is somehow increasing visibility and trying to make a more equal and better world. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ray. We will have after a little bit more time if you would like to explain more about the strategy you're using. I think it's extremely important. Yesterday here in Belgrade, we also had a night dedicated to the questions of migrants, refugees, treating of the humans coming from another cultures and not accepting them, and I think it's extremely important. Yeah. I'm happy now to invite Ray Yates from Dublin City Arts Office to tell us a little bit about their work.
Hi, my name is Ray Yates. I work for Dublin City Council in the role of the City Arts Officer. I suppose my job is that of a public servant. So my job is to serve the public through the arts and to try to support the development of the arts within the area that Dublin City Council is responsible for. Dublin City Council is, the local government of Dublin City, and Dublin City is unusual as a capital city. It also houses the national cultural institutions, government departments, the Arts Council. So it is always in partnership that a lot of these agencies have to work. And Dublin City Council has 5,000 employees at 144 work locations, and it contributes about 10 million in cash and owns, in excess of 30 cultural buildings throughout the city, though it only operates a couple of those. And when I thought about what I would say today, I always wait till some kind of story or image comes into my head, and the story that came into my head was that of my uncle. He came from a very poor family in the Midlands, as did my mother. Their father had been invalided very young, and there was almost no money coming into the house. And part of their job as children was to try and get food. And he went to the local monastery close to the house, where he was treated regularly, not very kindly, by the monks. And he always remembered the sound of their sandals coming down. And that sound really resonated with me because it would be a particular kind of sound. And those stories and the stories like that are things I grew up on. And they were stories of power. That was the first thing I saw, that if you have to ask for help, you're vulnerable. And if you have resources and power, you don't have to ask for help that much. You can kind of take care of yourself or buy what you want. But if you're in any way by lack of resources, maybe it's usually by accident, because of where you were born or the color of your skin or you're now reliant on people with power. And I'm very aware in my own position that people will come to me and they want help. They want support, they want encouragement, and they may want financial resources. And I can't help everybody that comes to see me, but I can, I think, try and do my very best to be kind and to be encouraging and to help where I can, and also to use whatever skills I've developed. Spent 40 years working in the arts, to use the skills I've developed to try and pinpoint the place I can be of most help with the resources that I have. And the area of human rights for me is very much about the relationship between power and vulnerability. I can admit it myself, embarrassingly, that it took me a long time to understand that I should not force my way into situations where, or take advantage or become the center of attention, when other people were struggling, whether it's in a meeting or in a situation. And that competitive part of people, that primitive part, is the place that empowers people to intimidate and exploit other people. And the corollary of this is that also, because I have to say no, I may at times be somebody who could misuse the power of saying no. And I try to reflect on that a lot when I meet anybody. I think it's very important in my job to meet everybody and to respond to anybody who asks me to, whether it's by email or if they want to see me. Now, of course, it's over Zoom. And that I listen no matter what stage of development that they're at. So the arts, for me anyway, breaks down just to, it's very hard to define the arts, but if we said it broke down between practitioners, like people who are professionally practicing, I've always been a huge fan of John Scott, and he's one of the most important practitioners nationally and internationally that Ireland has produced in his generation. But then there are participants, people who want to learn and express themselves through the arts, whether it's they're studying or they're taking part in something that professionals are also working in. And then, of course, there's audiences, and we all rely on audiences, and we always have to know, is our audience growing? Does it include diverse people? Are people getting access to, are they developing the habit of going to see? And are there facilities for them? Like, a lot of my work is in developing arts infrastructure or finding new arts infrastructure. That's become a big part of my job. And the very long journey to open a building or find a building or kind of make a building work. But the biggest part for me of human rights is values. Like, what values are we bringing every day? And the first thing I grew up, I think, at a time where you weren't really sure that you had value if you didn't perform in particular ways. So if you weren't very good at school, you were not seen as having as much value as those that did perform very well at school. If you were of a different color, you were seen as having less value than people who are, so to speak, white. If you were disabled, if you struggled with, any kind of difficulty, you automatically became marginalized, because the strong, those that without those difficulties could proceed. And we still reward this. We still say, that is the best and that is the worst. That is the winner and that is the loser. And that attitude, is something that really has to be investigated, because we do want people to really express themselves and realize their potential. But you only have to go to an unemployment office when I was younger, when I was unemployed, and could feel that you weren't very valued, because even the decor in this office and the manner in which you were treated was very different than if you were going to a different kind of office. And to this day, that very stark, simple way of looking at people always keeps impressing me, because everybody should be treated as if they are of value. Even if they have behaved badly, maybe particularly if they've behaved badly. Like, I think, of prisoners in particular who for all kinds of reasons may have been seen by us to have hurt other people or damaged society in some way. It's a mark of us, of our generosity, how prisoners are treated or how people are treated if they've behaved badly. And I think what unifies all religions, that could claim to be a religion, is compassion. There isn't a religion that doesn't subscribe to this. So I try in my work to have that reflected, and I'd be particularly sensitive to projects that very much look at a standard artistically, but also want their project to be the development of people involved. So John Scott's project is very, very typical, I think, of a project where excellence is important, but inclusion and development is important. And I think, too, it's good to talk artistically for a second, because some people say, but if you're working with people who are not talented, to use that word, who are not professionals, aren't you trying to make like a very bad soccer team try to look like they're playing in the top league? And you see, that analogy again looks to the winner-loser way of thinking about people. Art rises above this and says the rules of every artistic project are different. And you can construct the rules in a way that you can become artistically very significant. So I remember back, for example, on Broken Talkers, when they gathered the gay community into a choir in a great project. And the way that whole project was constructed and the authenticity of the participation made it artistically significant in a way that only these participants could have created. So it's not the case there are winners and losers in the arts. There is the right kind of participation, the right kind of practice, the right kind of audience engagement. Because development and indeed human rights are an attitude much more than they are an activity. And we don't always have to focus on those that are marginalized, but to try to be the change that we want to see in the world. It's one of my favorite phrases. And to accept also, like as the Dalai Lama says, that everybody wants happiness and everybody wants to avoid suffering. But at the same time, there is suffering. And it is difficult also to maintain a long period of happiness. You have to maintain it in all kinds of, very difficult situations. So in approaching the arts, then, I can't be separated from my values. And I've fallen many times and fallen into the trap of competitiveness, fallen into the trap of the hierarchy, fallen into the trap of, trying to be a winner rather than simply, embracing my own vulnerability, my own insecurity, and realizing that everybody's struggling. It's difficult as well, too, because a public servant has to be precise. I have to make sure that you get exactly the right money that you asked for, and the report is correct, and that everything is put together in a particular way. And you expect that precision from me, the public does. And how can I bring gentleness and precision together is a big challenge for me, because I've often fallen into, I'm being very precise now, I'm going to be very tough. And sometimes I've been so gentle that I lost precision completely. So combine gentleness and precision is an incredibly important part of my job, and that I always try and be gentle, even under pressure, because it can be the case too that people who are suffering are not always very nice to you, and it's very important that I check my privilege and do all I can to return gentleness, no matter what the pressures that are put on me. I wish I could achieve that at any kind of very high percentage, but I really try to. And like many people who grew up in the arts and tried to be a person, kind of the force of our personality is terribly important in the arts. Developing humility has been the biggest challenge of my life. I mean, any small grain of it that I can manage on a daily basis is a big triumph for me. And I've always liked that definition of humility, that we know who we are, and we're trying to be all that we can be. So I didn't want to speak today very specifically. I mean, I've worked a lot in community and I've worked a lot in the area of poverty, but it's obvious if you work in a poor neighborhood. I worked in the area of Ballymun for many years, and I visit a lot of the poor areas of the city who have arts programs running, that poverty is almost a spiritual condition. There's an enormous difference between being broke and having the perception of being poor. And it's very important that the idea of esteem becomes central to how we treat people, and the arts are an enormous liberating factor. They were an enormous liberating factor in my own life when I realized that I could, in fact, jump out of the class that I was in, so to speak, or as Dermot Bulger says, we don't have a class system in Ireland, we have a caste system. That I could leave the caste I was in and I could be mobile. And I think the arts gives enormous hope to people that they can step out of the boxes that they are in. Like hope is an incredible word. And, I remember one writer talking about how it kind of removes the suction cups that we have with the past, and it alleviates us from the anxiety of the future. So yeah. I think that giving hope to people is the most important thing, particularly when they're marginalized. And that hope can come just from being treated in a decent way. Like the city, for example, is the Dublin Region Homelessness Executive is in Dublin City Council. And I've watched colleagues all of the time behaving with great compassion to people who are suffering. And it is a very difficult situation when the demands are so great. I suppose I'll conclude by saying that I'm very honoured to have been put. I'm very honoured to have been put on the panel. I don't have the track record or extraordinary ability in this area as the rest of the panel, and I've really learned a lot from the speaker so far, and I look forward to the rest of the debate. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. It was absolutely inspiring talk of you, and it's really incredible how much ideas we share. Yesterday and today we had very many things in talking in Belgrade, which are very, very similar what you're talking about. But we will have a next round of speeches, and you will have more time. So thank you very much. It was really wonderful what you said, essentially. And I would call Jeannie, please, McDonald, to continue, and please introduce yourself and have a small talk about your work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Really wonderful to be part of this, as people have said, and already I'm kind of furiously writing notes and feeling inspired by the things that the other speakers have said. So thank you for that. I'm here to talk about a project that happened in 2019, which was the Solo Sirens Festival. It was a festival we created at the Civic Theatre in Tallaght. And we just had a symposium actually 2 weeks ago, an online symposium reflecting on the learning of that festival. So it's great to be part of this at a stage where, we're beginning something. We have a lot of questions. We're trying a lot of things. And we're really trying to do something differently. So Solo Sirens Festival has a mission of amplifying women's voices on stage and beyond. It has a mission of overcoming patriarchy for the good of us all. And in order to do that, of course, in order to work for gender equality, we have to look at all the other kinds of exclusions and barriers that are interwoven. So our location in Tallaght was very important because Tallaght is an area of Dublin that suffers socioeconomic disadvantage. It's also an area with a very high number of new immigrants, and we know that they suffer all kinds of forms of discrimination as well, based on their status of immigration, based on their ethnicity, based on their race. So when we came to addressing gender, we knew that there were a lot of other things we needed to address at the same time, and a lot of other assumptions, because patriarchy comes with all kinds of bedfellows, I suppose, like the very rank and oppressive form of capitalism that we're living in. So one of those assumptions is the idea of individualism, and that one individual can be a great artist or create something great on their own, which is not true. So we are a collective, and I do want to acknowledge the people I did this work with. I mean, I'm here on my own, but I've done this work with wonderful producer Jennifer Webster, wonderful assistant producer Martha Knight, and then a whole team of women who made this festival happen, and a whole team of men and women and people outside of gender binaries who came to participate in the festival as audiences as well. So maybe just to take you back a little bit in terms of what the festival was and where it came from. I did a solo show in 2016. It was called Enthroned, and it was very autobiographical. And as I made that work, I realized that for a woman to express something in her own voice is a radical act in this world, to tell her own story in her own voice. And it shouldn't be radical. So I was struck by what John said. You know, John, you were presenting some work going, this actually shouldn't be radical, but the sad reality of the context we're in is that some things are radical that should not be. And I found that as I wrote that piece, as well as telling the story, I needed to confront all the kind of patriarchal gaze that a woman's story is framed within. And I particularly needed to confront the patriarchy within myself. And that was perhaps the most disturbing thing to look at. All the self-doubt, all the self-recrimination that I think is very insidious in the lives of women, and it holds us back, and then the world is deprived of our voices, and it's time for that to change. So what we did in 2019 in the first model of this festival was we presented 3 solo works. So I wanted, although it was a solo show, I mean, there's no such thing as a solo show. It takes a village. So I wanted to work with other solo artists. I wanted to find out what challenges they had. I wanted to find out what they'd learned from creating their work. I also do a lot of community engaged work. So I wanted to work with a local collective of women and to help to facilitate a process in which those stories and those voices could be heard. We also tried very much to work with the audience as participants. So somebody at our symposium a few weeks ago said that he didn't feel like a consumer as an audience member, and I was really delighted to hear that, because I think that notion that the arts are products to be consumed is not very helpful or very creative, and certainly doesn't allow us to create change through the arts, because the idea that everything is a product to be consumed is something that comes from capitalism. And I think we're in a stage right now in the world where we're really aware that that model has to change, that it's not working anymore. So our audiences were part of the festival in a very participatory way. We had discussions, we had video feedback, we were engaged with the audiences throughout. The festival happened over 6 weeks. It happened every weekend, every second weekend for 6 weeks. So the idea was that a dialogue and a discourse could build. And as I said, we had a symposium then online a few weeks ago, and our audiences continued to be part of that and continued to be part of the dialogue. And we really strove to find ways to have difficult conversations, because I think right now we're at a point where we're hearing a lot of stories that we haven't heard before. And thank God it's time. Thank God we're at this watershed. But also it's tricky to have those discussions. And we didn't want to have a party line. We didn't want people to feel like there was a clear right or wrong. We wanted dialogue, not debate. And we wanted people, when they hit their blind spots, including ourselves who were making the work, that they would be cared for in that moment, like that there would be gentleness, that there would be a kind of I love that Ray used the word gentleness, because we need to be gentle with each other, because change is hard. Change is very hard. Another aspect of the festival was mentorship. Martha, our assistant producer, came in as a mentee. So did Michelle Henry as an assistant director to me. And that was very important, because I believe very strongly that young women need role models, and that young women need a space in which they can have honest discussions about how patriarchy and the lack of gender equality is affecting them. And certainly when I was starting out, I wished I had more of those spaces. So I hope that that's something that we're creating for young women. We also had an academic, Claire Keogh, PhD candidate at Trinity College Dublin, and Claire was researching the festival, and then she presented her findings at the symposium. And that was very important for this first round, particularly to have an outside eye who was noticing what we were trying to do and what was working and what wasn't working. Something that I loved that Claire said in her paper is that she said she felt the festival presented a kind of way of being rather than the way of being. So I think we've been at a point in the arts and in the world where we've been saying for a long time there is the way of being, and actually we now know that the way of being is extremely specific to very few very privileged people, and we want a world with a multiplicity of ways of being. So that was what we hoped to create in the festival, and what we hope to try to continue to create going forwards. And then I think we also wanted a space where people felt they could exhale a little. I think, again, we are on this like production model in the arts world, and it's very hard to change anything if we can't pause and reflect. So we tried to build space for reflection in for our audiences, but also for ourselves as a team of artists making the work. And we're continuing that process. I mean, something I love about our meetings is, on the one hand, we're going, okay, what time is the tech? And how long can the post show last? And what time does the videographer arrive? And then at the same time, we're also going, are we truly feminist in the way that we run these meetings? And is our aesthetic truly feminist? And so we're trying to create space to reflect and to have dialogue as we make the work, and to keep changing ourselves too, as we hope to also create a greater change. So I guess just as a final thing to say with respect to human rights, again, I think the location in Tallaght is very important for that. I know Article 27 of the Universal Declaration says that everybody has the right to participate in culture. And we know that in Irish society right now, actually, very few people have a chance to exercise that right. And the Civic Theatre has done a lot of really important work to make sure that people living in Tallaght and South County Dublin have that capacity, as has Tallaght Community Arts, who are another organisation that helped us and supported us to create the festival. So wanted to acknowledge them as well. And if you're interested in our work, we always would love to hear from people. So we're Solo Sirens across all the social media. Our website is www.solosirens.info, and you can find out how to contact us there. But maybe I'll leave it at that, and then we'll see what other chats come up for the rest of the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Yes, we will have more questions for you later. And I would invite now Mary, please, to talk a little bit about her work before we pass to the questions. Yes.
Hello, everybody, and I'm delighted to be here on this panel with all these great artists and cultural makers. My name is Mary Moynihan, and I'm Artistic Director of the Smashing Times International Centre for the Arts and Equality, and I'm also a writer and a theatre and a filmmaker. And Smashing Times was set up in 1991 by a group of women artists who met at the Focus Theatre in Dublin. And initially, we were all working within a professional theatre context, and we were very aware of the power of the medium we were working in, which was theatre at that time. And also, as well, we felt in 1991 that theatre was still theatre was exclusive. There was an element of elitism in theatre, and I very much wanted to do something about bringing theatre outside of a traditional theatre space out into communities. So that was the reason why a number of us got together, and we said, let's continue to create professional theatre work, but let's bring it outside of the traditional theatre space. Now, there was another reason why we set up as well, and at that time it was to do with, we were mostly women when we first set up the company, and we were very conscious at the time of the lack of women playwrights and the lack of strong roles in theatre for women. So again, we wanted to start creating our own work, and also looking at work by women playwrights and how to bring them more to the fore. So we set the company up. We started taking theatre out into different communities. We literally, in the beginning, got on a bus, took our shows out, put on the shows in different communities across Dublin. And after the shows, we would have post-show discussions with our audiences. And those post-show discussions became so animated in relation to the issues we were bringing up that we started to design workshops, because we felt, rather than just talking, how could we continue to use the medium of theatre to enable people to themselves express in a more fundamental way, using the body, using the voice, using the imagination? How could we enable or pass on this power of theatre for a more deeper form of dialogue and a deeper form of expression? So we started designing workshops. For many years then, we worked in peace building and reconciliation in Northern Ireland. We were then invited to work across Europe, and that's where we were asked to bring our expertise, if you like, in using the arts for issue-based work. So I had worked in anti-racism, I had worked in peace building. We run an extensive programme using the arts to promote mental health. And we were asked to share this expertise working with different organisations across Europe, and that was a fantastic opportunity. And through that, we met people like Diana from that theatre in Serbia, and many different organisations. And what I found very interesting about that was, in a way, we felt we were alone. We felt we were on our own creating the type of work we were doing, because we were, if you like, going against the mainstream. We felt for a long time in Ireland that our work was not accepted. We felt we were outside. We chose to be outside, and I think that's really important. We didn't try to get inside the mainstream structure. We saw a path, and we wanted to go down this path of using the arts in a different way, using the arts for diversity, for inclusion, using the arts to challenge the inequalities that we saw. And we made our own path as we went along. But what I found interesting, when we met with different organisations across Europe, we found similar journeys. So, for example, with Da Theatre, they had worked in a post-conflict society. Their journey was very similar to our journey. The methods they were using was very similar. We also had a talk as well about how, and I wonder, is this just with female artists? Is it a stereotype? But the fact that we didn't, up to a certain point, write down what our methodologies were, talk about our methodologies. We were very busy making the work. But how do you define what you've just done? To sit down and look at how you've created work in this unique way, and to share that with the wider community. And that's a process we're undertaking now. And then, as part of the work over the years, we decided to set up the Arts and Human Rights Festival, because we wanted to find a way to make more visible the work that was happening using the arts to promote human rights, and also as well to try and find a way to celebrate human rights. A lot of the issues you work with can be very dark. You are going into spaces, having difficult conversations. But I suppose for me, the work is about going into the dark areas and finding a way to shine the light on those areas. And as well, what I was particularly interested in with the festival was making connections, because even though we talk a lot about connections, we talk a lot about bringing different communities together, there is still barriers that exist. There is still a lack of communication. So, for example, even though we've been separated by COVID-19 and by lockdowns, the separation has kept us apart. But yet, by going online, we have found a lot of artists and a lot of organisations have started to come together to have the conversations. And I suppose the conversations we're having at the moment is, we've reached a point in society where I feel we're at a crossroads, if you like. There's a lot of talk about creating a different type of world, talking about looking what our values are. That's what we're doing with our artwork. We're talking about sharing the values. So the values that Smashing Times would have are values of inclusion, values of diversity, values of having a multitude of stories, challenging the dominant narratives that have been told, and bringing different narratives into the space. And how do we make that more real in society is a big question that I'm asking myself at the moment. And what I mean by that is that I feel, for example, in Smashing Times, we have done a lot of work around how to promote diversity, how to promote inclusion. But is that enough? That's what I've been asking myself. Is it enough to have representation? Is it enough to have the language around diversity and inclusion? And I don't think it is, because what I think is happening is, I'm seeing diversity being spoken about, I'm seeing equality being spoken about, but are we seeing real change happen? And I think this is an important point, because when I talk about real change, what I mean is, you can have diverse representation, but have you actually challenged the power structure that's at play? You can have increased diversity, but perhaps what you're doing is bringing people in from, for example, the same socioeconomic background, There may be representation there, but as what has fueled that inequality in the first place, has that structure actually changed? So as an artist, I've been thinking about this idea of what is real change. And I think for me, as an artist working in human rights, going forward, I would love to see more work being done around the idea of connections. The European connections with artists across Europe are so important. The connections that are being made in Ireland with diverse artists coming together around gender, around neurodiversity, around all the different areas. But what do we do with those connections? How can we go forward with them? How are we going to challenge the power structures that have excluded and perhaps are talking about inclusion now, but how far are they going with that inclusion? That's the area I'd like to see discussed further. For example, state authorities to go beyond representation and talk about how do you actually share power? What does it mean to share power? What's going to be involved in sharing power? They're the difficult conversations that still have to happen. So just to end, I think for us, having this festival in Dublin has been a wonderful opportunity. We have brought so many different organisations together. I had the opportunity to create a film called Humanity in the Rooms, which was inspired by actually Samuel Beckett, and it came from the Second World War. And this idea, because for me, what's been important is telling stories of no matter what the adversities are that you experience, how do you find the courage to have hope and to have resilience and to keep going? And they're the stories I like to share, wonderful stories of people finding courage and hope despite the adversity, and courage and hope to hold on to a sense of humanity. And that shared humanity, there's been lovely comments made by the different speakers about compassion, empathy, care, kindness. All those are important, but then to look at how we can actually make them real in society, I think is important, and building connections as we go forward at all these intersecting roads that are happening at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Really inspiring all together. I will use the opportunity now to call also our observers, our people that are following online this talk, to submit their questions. And I would just remind us, I was taking some notes about the words, ideas that came out from this conversation, which all together now it's really intense. It's full of ideas that could provoke eventually change, as you said, Mary. So we were having like a culture of human rights, of course, lack of awareness in Serbia, but I think it's a general issue. Then we had mentioning the body that talks often much more than the words. Then we had a question of values and which values we are promoting. We have to rethink probably the values that we live in this capitalist world. We had a statement about the compassion. I think we all share this need for more compassion, for real attitude in our societies and our work. Then we had a need to rethink the question gender issue, even look inside ourselves in patriarchy in ourselves. I found this very interesting point. Then gentleness appear and kindness like kind of leitmotiv together with compassion in all talks. And I found this fantastic, including our talk yesterday in Belgrade as well, was focused on that. And using arts to challenge inequality that we see around us. Mary was mentioning that I think it's a mission of all of us, and we have a great need for connection. We are doing this now, and we hope to broaden this. And the question
Yeah, I will. I think all those different things that were being, the idea of sharing power, I'd love to maybe generate a discussion on that. What are the values? And I do think there is a commonality of values here. Something that I wanted to say very briefly was what Smashing Towns have become aware of through our connections in Europe, and Diana, you can probably speak about this, is we are seeing attacks on artists across Europe happening. So artists are standing up for human rights, but what we're seeing is artists themselves being the victim of human rights abuses. So, for example, we know from an organisation we're working with in Poland that the artistic director of the main theatre company in Łódź in Poland was recently forced to resign because he would not agree with the policies that were being passed down from the government in Poland. We're seeing that in Turkey as well. There's a number of theatre companies have come out and said that they're being denied funding. So funding was taken away because of the lockdown, and the Turkish state have stepped in to give funding to allow the theatres to open again. But what they're doing is they're not giving funding to the theatres who have any kind of left-wing philosophy or don't adhere to the Turkish political ideologies. We know it about Belarus. Diana, you can talk about Serbia. And I would say that the arts, that when you see attacks on human rights, you'll also see attacks on the arts. That if you lose freedom of expression and human rights, the first thing that you often lose in society is the arts. So I think it's become very important what artists need to do in terms of raising awareness of human rights. So I don't know, what do you think? Does anybody have any views on that in terms of have the arts become much more fundamental in society? Are they important, and do we need to look at how we link much more closely to what's happening in terms of attacks on human rights in Ireland and across Europe? Anybody want to comment on that? Okay.
I would like to comment, yes. Today we had a debate actually where we spoke about what are the connections links between arts and other fields in promoting more, let's say, just society. And we actually exactly spoke about the violation of artistic rights. And recently here in Serbia, in Belgrade, literally these days, we are having a grave abuse of artistic rights. We had the exhibition with the comics, and the right-wing guys entered into exhibition and they destroyed all works, tore apart all works. We had attacks to director that created a show about Srebrenica. This is the site in Bosnia where Serbian military and paramilitary committed genocide in 1995. And we had just yesterday and today we are having protests by right-wingers because there is the festival that came from Kosovo, and so being presented here in Belgrade, and literally we are having the cordons of police protecting the venues where this festival is happening. And I mean the huge protests on the side of the right-wing people. So in a way, my question was also to my colleagues today, as much as these cases are really terrible, on the other hand, it really speaks about the power of the arts, because I mean about the importance of the arts in society, even that the people that are coming from those groups or from the government or from the right wing are attacking the works of arts. In a way, this also means that art became very important, and that art is obviously the way to open up the important discussions in the society and open up the change. So as much as it is a very serious violation of the essential human rights, at the same time, for me, there is even something bizarrely optimistic in this situation, because arts do matter. I'm speaking about the kind of arts that we are all speaking about in opposition to so-called arts through creative industries that were appropriated by basically capitalism and are simply the fake reflection of the society, and are not really expressing what communities and society needs. So, I mean, this was my, this is really something that is ongoing here, and it's ongoing all around Europe. But in a way, it really witnesses about the importance and the power of arts.
Okay. John or Jenny or Ray, would you like to comment on that, on the idea of, and I see a question came in too, because it's about using the arts to stand up to intolerance, the growing intolerance. And are we protected in Ireland? Is that intolerance here? Some people say that we're seeing more intolerance in Irish society. It's always been there. Is it growing? How does that impact on us as artists?
I know in my festival, I programmed Morgan Bullock and also several other Irish choreographers who didn't look Irish. And on social media, they were subjected to hate posts from people when we ran our festival. And our social media person was going around deleting them. There were a small number, but they were coming in. Maybe that's from a very small fringe. Something I've found is that there are different battles that we have to have, and some of them are tiny, tiny battles, like even something about casting. I think Ray was talking about the excellence and there are things in contemporary dance. Some of the dancers I work with are these beautifully trained, excellent stars who have spent years in conservatoires, and they are magnificent, magnificent dancers. And some of the people I have put into the same production come from a village in a small country in Africa and have no theatre etiquette, no performances training, and it's been at times a clash, even within the dynamic of the production and the rehearsal process, accepting these different levels of expertise. But for me, the dancer who's got the most beautiful high legs or is doing these beautiful things, that's one type of virtuosity. But everybody I have put into the work is in another way virtuosic. It's maybe an inner virtuosity, it's a spiritual virtuosity, so that this woman comes from this small village and she just does this with her arms and she just loses it. And everyone just drops everything and we can't stop looking at her. And for some reason we're crying and we don't know why. And she told me some anecdote about what had happened to her and what she was letting out at that moment. She told me a couple of years later. And these are battles. And I do what I do to make my work. I do fight a fight, and I've embraced that fight, and I'm enraged. I'm enraged sometimes by my own colleagues, by people within the profession, and how that kind of work is perceived. And because some of the people I work with are survivors of torture, as opposed to just migrants who are coming in looking for our jobs or living off our welfare system, that they have a sad story, and that's permissible and that's acceptable. There's just so many subtle things I come across and so many things I learn about everybody. I don't know, there's big battles, and I remember Judith Molina, when I spent months in my youth running around France in Volkswagen bus with the Living Theatre, and Judith Molina was part of it. And she said the thing about the political theatre is it must always be great art. She insisted, I insist on great art. And to seduce through the beauty and to make the beauty so overwhelming. I think they also talked about Genet used some idea of great beauty, and for the beauty to be so overwhelming that it seduces and it breaks down. And maybe through that, it hits people. Because I think if we're overtly always at the political question, it can maybe switch some people off. But we lure them. We do what we do in as full a way as possible, and that can make a difference. We performed last year at the Five Lamps Arts Festival at the Canal Bank for people. There were just ordinary people passing by, and they watched a performance with a Nigerian Irish dancer and a white Irish dancer doing it. Two beautiful men doing this intimate duet, leaning on each other. And just to look at how they reacted or responded and how visceral it was. And it was free. It was out there, and it was the weirdest dance you could make. And there's different levels of battles, and there's different things. We didn't do this as a battle. We wanted people to see it, but to see it in that context and to make the work available, and to invite it to be seen. We didn't do it for a fight, but it turned out to be a type of a fight, and maybe there were victories in that as well. There's so many different fights, and everything you were saying about the diversity, the inequality. I get called sometimes by theatre directors and other artists, people who say, "Oh, I'd love to use some of your Africans." And it's not done in a derogatory way. Can I have the emails of your Africans? And I remember saying to one, "Are you going to pay them?" I said, "Well, we don't really have much of a budget. We've got a big production costs, and no." And they thought that was okay. They weren't. Yeah. These are nice people.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Maybe it's about attitude, really.
Yeah.
I think this is example. It's about attitude. Yeah.
We have Drinka is back now, which is brilliant. Yes. Jenny wants to come in there.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think what is made in political work or in work that tries to do something different is extremely beautiful, and it's extremely exciting to see something different, and it can make us aware how often we're seeing just repetitions of the same forms and structures and stories. So I think we have to get a little braver sometimes about saying that when we show something that is made in a different way, that has standards of care and collaboration, that very often creates something breathtakingly beautiful and fascinating and new and exciting. But I think in order to resource ourselves, there's getting back to what Gianna was saying about the human rights of artists. Particularly in this pandemic, we're really getting clear in Ireland that the ways most artists have to live here give them almost no time or energy to try and do anything different. So I think the two are interwoven. I think that as artists, we do have this capacity to create change through our work, and the work that I don't see any contradiction between creating change and making something of beauty. But I think sometimes people don't even have space to draw breath because they live in inadequate housing. They don't know when they're going to get paid next. It's incredibly precarious the way most artists are living here, and that's making it tough for artists to do things differently. And yeah.
I was asked to pass. We have a question from the audience, and this is the question from Sarah Walsh, and she's asking, can the panelists that work with drama and conflict or peace building talk about how they approach distance in their work in relation to conflict, violence, or trauma? So maybe would like John, Diana.
I'll very quickly say something was my when I first went to the Center for Care for Survivors of Torture, and I went into this room and I wondered, what does a torture survivor look like? There was this group of ordinary, beautiful people sitting in the room, and I said to the facilitator, who was my go-between, I asked him, "Is this the group?" they're all torture survivors? And he said, mm-hmm. I said, are there any do's or don'ts? Is there anything I have to know? And they said, the one thing I could not do was ask what had happened, because they were in the process. One of the aims of torture is to destroy people without killing them, as a way of spreading terror and fear in society. It's more effective than killing someone, because if you have someone who has been tortured or destroyed in the community and they're visible, they frighten everyone else. Whereas if someone is killed, they disappear and you forget about them. So I couldn't ask anything. I could not. They said, you can say, what's your name? Where are you from? But that's it. So the very first thing I said, we stood in a circle because that was non-hierarchical. And I said that my work is non-narrative and is often abstract. And my work does not necessarily tell a story. And the dancers I work with are invited to also contribute material, but we don't try to justify it with a story. And that if anybody in the group wanted to say or do anything, I would help them how to say it, but I would never ask them what they were saying. And afterwards, they told me that when I said that, they felt secure. They felt it was the pact with me, that they thought, okay, I think this guy can help us. And in a sense, they used the situations, the workshops. They were just workshops. I didn't even dare think of making a performance. It took a year, and what happened in the workshops was just so incredible. Every workshop was like the best workshop of my life, and the things that were happening were humbling me, exciting me, and making me cry. And I was babbling. I was going out of these workshops and going into the studio with my professional dancers saying, you can't believe what happened yesterday in the thing. And I thought, I have to do this. Finally, I went to them and I said, can I make a piece? Will you perform in a piece? Will we make a piece together? I still don't know. For most of them, I don't know their stories. I don't know the personal stories. And that was one of the things about the nature of the work that I was making anyway, that fitted in with the needs of the people I was working with. So it was distant. But there is something, Martha Graham, the choreographer, always said, the body does not lie. And some other truth came out of the dancers. We performed part of one of my works, The White Piece in Paris, and this woman who shakes all the time, I made her a solo, and I just said, breathe and try not to move. And she just breathed in, and she was holding herself. And this French critic said that he'd heard that the cast were survivors of torture, and he thought he was going to see something with chains and people doing muffled screams and these kind of things. And he saw this very beautiful, simple thing. But he said this solo of this woman where she was holding her hands and trying to not shake, and she did this to not shake. He said it was one of the most violent solos he'd ever seen, because her history and the waves of what had happened to her was coming out. She was not doing it. She was breathing and trying to breathe and hold still, but something else came out. So it was always, with me, it was indirect. That wouldn't work for everybody, but in the nature of my work and my work process, the fact that it was indirect got some other larger thing out.
Yeah, thank you, John. We have not so much time left. Would you like to comment, Diana, these questions before I have a last closing questions to Mary and all of you?
Yes, I can tell many stories about the work in the realm of peace building and conflict resolution and arts. But actually, what I would like to reflect on is something that Ray said that really struck me. And he said that he is the civil servant that serves. And this is something that I never heard here from any civil servant, from people working in the arts councils or ministries and so on, that they serve. And I think that the way how we artists could and should work is to serve. And this is what was my and our experience with working with people coming from very traumatized situations and backgrounds and so on. I always felt humbled, and also I'm feeling all the time that I'm just serving, and I think that could be the answer to this question. And also the notion of beauty is an excellent work is so important. And I used to say that basically if idea is so important to community and to society, then the work has to be even better, even more done with excellency, damn good, let's say.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think, like we all agree, really the power of art is in the excellency and the power to influence the society, to talk about the human rights, and of course, even more for that, our work can be provocative and not very much wanted, not very easy to give the money for. And the question is maybe this time, especially for Mary and maybe Ray, and what can we do if our work is getting more and more provocative, and how we can secure that if we can get funding, and is it maybe one of the way in connections, in getting together and creating more links between the artists which are engaged in the works like this. So maybe Mary and Ray, if you can share this time we have left.
Okay. In a way, this idea, provocation, it goes back to the type of work, for example, we do in peace building. For me, when I use the arts in peace building, I'm very much about going in and bringing together groups who do not get on with each other, bringing together groups who have experienced conflict. And for me, that's about creating a safe space. So there's a lot of paradoxes in the arts, and particularly in theatre. And the paradox is you're creating a workshop or a performance where you want to encourage people to take risks, to go beyond their own position, to reach out, to maybe express things that are difficult. But to do that, you have a responsibility to create a safe space. And for me, that's what the arts do. The arts create a space that enables and empowers people. So for me, the arts, we may use provocation, but it's not, if I'm working in human rights, it's not provocation for the sake of provocation. It's provocation for genuine change. But to do that, you have to be open, you have to be inclusive, you have to use your art to create an environment where all stories are listened to and heard. And in a way, it's that idea of disinhibiting, building trust, creating that environment, which could be a mirror of the larger world we'd like to see. It is a world where we all are unique and we can all express who we are, no matter how different that is. And I find a way to listen, have my story heard, but equally, how do I step into someone else's shoes and listen to their story, no matter how difficult that may be. So for me, yes, you can use the arts to provoke, and we do want change, but it has to be done in a way that is empowering for everybody, not in a damaging way. It's a safe way. And again, it's the paradox. We're taking risks, but we're being safe. We're challenging people, but yet at the same time, we're doing it because we want to create something we want to transform and create a society that is a vision of a better world, if you like. And I think when it comes to using human rights, there's a huge responsibility on artists. And your core ethos and your core values, that's what counts. That's what's really important. And in a way, that's what joins us all together. We've defined those core values. They are empathy, compassion, care. They are about transformation. They are about saying, we want a better world to live in. So how do we make that real? And again, I go back to that idea of let's not just talk about it. How do we create that transformation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd really agree with what everything Mary said there. Yeah, I think that's be specific examples of moving from an idealistic place into a place where you actually implement those ideals, and you can never implement them perfectly. What I thought of there was like being kind of shouted at recently within the system. I won't say it was within my system, or let's say it was within the system. And what a challenge that is when you meet someone who wants to kind of use power. You know? And there's nothing more powerful, I think, when somebody really listens to you, particularly if you're being difficult. And I really wanted in that encounter to be very, but not in any way to take on the. And I haven't always succeeded in that, but on that particular day, so, you know, I got the grace to do that. And slowly but surely, this was, you know, it started to step down, and you know, there was a good, you know, a good outcome. And also, it's really important that there's kind of forgiveness as well, because like I've made an awful lot of mistakes, you know, and people have been hurt because of those mistakes. You know, other people will make mistakes, whether through the misuse of power or whatever. You know, finding that place where there's really deep listening is really important, without giving up. You know, without being pushed away, but without surrendering your gentleness to the other person's violence. And then when things are implemented, we need artist pay was brought up there. You know, if we're going to make sure that artists get paid on projects, we're going to need very complex instruments of because artists also sometimes want to give their time and do give their time all the time, and they're free to do that. But also, how do we make sure? Do we sample certain projects and have a look at them to see was everybody treated equitably? What exact protocol? And it would take some time of debate between public servants, artists, producers, to find protocols that make sure. And it's that very specific implementation that's part of my job. I think it's easy to say the broad, idealistic thing, but as Mary says, it has to be translated into protocols and instruments that actually work. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we could not have a better closing of the session. And here we are at the end. I think it was very inspiring. We brought very many strong ideas and visions, which I think it's really the way that we assure that hope happen. This hope that we share that transform in something real and in changes that we all want. And I really think all together we have the power, and more we are together, more probability that we achieve these future foundings and secure the work going on. So I have to thank to every one of you, all our audience that was following the event. And this was the closing of this Arts and Human Rights Festival Across the Borders, hosted by Smashing Times and Dach Theatre. So across the borders, Ireland, Serbia, and I thank you again and hope to see us all for the next meeting soon.